So one of the things I've been doing since recovering from surgery a little bit is, clearly not getting a haircut, but also catching up on some TV shows that I really, really wanted to watch. And in particular, the fifth and final season of The Bear. Now, The Bear's a weird one to me because if you take those first two seasons, they are, for my money, two of the best seasons of television you can possibly watch, with some of the all-time great, like, modern episodes of television. To the point that when season 3 came out, I was, like, fucking psyched. Only for that season of television to be the most disappointing thing I have ever experienced outside a Shenmue title. And the fall-off was immediate and deeply noticeable. And I think a part of that is just how sharp those first two seasons were. Like, the first season of The Bear, it's a really, really, like, kind of simple setup in a lot of ways. You have this dude who used to run, like, this sandwich shop with his family. He's gone off, he's become the best chef in the world, and now he's coming back after the death of his brother to basically try and keep this sandwich shop alive. And there's so much here in terms of, like, his own life and, like, the trauma that he endured while working at, like, the best restaurants on the planet, and, like, the fucked up restaurant industry and what is and is not okay and how to treat people, and how he's kind of absorbed all that, and if he is now going to pass that on to the people below him. And it was phenomenal. And I already loved the TV show by the end of season 1, but I think what really blew me away was season 2. Season 2 took a lot of the same ideas and tension from the first season, just this, like, environment where these people who clearly love each other and clearly care about each other are trapped in this just pressure cooker of an environment, to the point that they start screaming and everything goes wrong and they all handle it very badly. And it kind of took that, but then kind of started spinning the show off in these, like, other weird directions as well. You started getting these, like, insane bottle episodes where it's basically the characters going off on, like, these little excursions. But as opposed to those excursions feeling like, I guess, separate from the main story, they fed into the characters and how they develop so well that it's like, it really, really just elevated the show to this, like, insane other thing. And, like, you still had this whole idea and story built around the restaurant. Specifically in season 2, they're out of money and they're making one last gasp attempt to turn this old restaurant into this new, like, fancy high-end dining experience. And the entire season is them leading up to opening day, and if, you know, it's going to go well, if they can make all this work, if they can design a menu, and every part of it is, like, so intricately handled and, like, just bound into the overall story. I talked about this the last time I talked about The Bear on this channel, but the standout episode for me, and, like, there's a couple, but the standout episode is the episode built around Richie, because it's not just, like, showing you Richie having to, like, deal with his own shit. He specifically goes and works at, like, one of the best restaurants in the entire city to see what it is to be a service worker in a restaurant, and specifically around waiting tables. And what waiting tables means to, like, the best waiters in the city, and how for them, like, it's not just, like, this kind of, like, inconsequential job, as I feel like a lot of people would see it, but, like, this really important way to connect to other people. And it's still, I think, one of the best episodes of television I've ever seen, and I absolutely fucking adored it. We go from that to an incredible episode about, like, craft and pastry and what it means to be good at something, based in Copenhagen, where one of the chefs learns to make pastries, to then maybe the most nightmarish Christmas episode of anything I've ever seen, and then the final episode, which I can kind of only explain like, take End of Evangelion if it was, like, trapped in a freezer. That's what the second season of The Bear is, and it was absolutely fucking phenomenal. Then we hit season 3, and things got off to a weird start, because the first episode of season 3 was like this 30-minute, very, like, slow ambient montage of, like, flashback scenes from the different characters, a lot of which we sort of already knew, and it was all very surreal and set to this, like, really kind of slow-paced kind of soundtrack. And a lot of people hated it. A lot of people didn't like it. But personally, I actually did. Because if there's going to be one weirdo in your fucking audience who is going to go nuts for some real, surreal, slow-paced ambient storytelling, it's going to be me. I love that stuff. And so to everyone else, I was like, guys, chill. It's The Bear. This is going to be great. We're going to have a great time with this season. only for the third season to be maybe one of the worst seasons of television I've seen in a long time. I've really tried to like think about why that is and why that third season just felt so bad. And I think, in all honesty, a lot of it comes down to the writing, but particularly they knew what they had with season 1 and 2 of The Bear. They could see what a huge like cultural phenomenon this thing was becoming, like not just as like a niche TV show where a bunch of characters are locked together in a small kitchen. The Bear was blowing up at this point. It was getting rave reviews. Its cast were becoming superstars. They've all like gone on to do so many different things. And it feels like there was a real truncated process in producing this thing. And I feel like every corner got cut, every compromise was made, and what you got was a dramatically watered down version of The Bear. That like heart-pounding plot of like, oh my fucking god, we have to make this restaurant work, we have to sacrifice our personal lives and pour everything of who we are into this restaurant, including like this absolutely scathing critique of like the toxic restaurant industry. It all kind of disappeared for this very like disjointed season where like you had those bottle episodes again, but so often it's like the bottle episodes felt like they had nothing to do with the restaurant. They were more just like these kind of sort of abstracted look into the characters' personal lives, none of which like connected back or like fed into the overall story. And it was just this extremely limp part of the TV show. And it sucks because I feel like the thing it really got away from is that fascination with like the restaurant business. And like that was a fascination to the point that like when I watched the first 2 seasons of The Bear, I could feel the love the show had for food and restaurants, and I went and I read like 4 different fucking books on running a restaurant. I have no interest in running a restaurant. It resonated that hard. Like, hang on, I have the list here. I read Unreasonable Hospitality, I Regret Nearly Everything, Setting the Table, Kitchen Confidential. All those books, by the way, fucking bangers. Would recommend every single one of them. Doesn't matter if you're into restaurants or not. And so I was now like watching this season of television and being like, this doesn't feel like it's about restaurants anymore. And there snuck into the show this weird syrupiness, I felt like. This stopped feeling like this gritty look at what it's like to work in a kitchen. And it started feeling like, honestly, like kind of a made-for-TV Hallmark movie. And, you know, all the characters were very kind of sweet. And, like, you know, there was still parts where they're, like, we're saying dick a lot or whatever. But the general level of writing and introspection of the characters, it just felt so condensed down. Then came season 4. And I later learned that season 4 was actually wrote at the same time of season 3. So they basically made 20 of these episodes in a really, really small amount of time, and it absolutely shows. All the problems of season 3 were there in season 4, but worse. And like, I know I talked about this last video as well, but I will never forget this one scene where Carmy, he meets the chef who like traumatized him. He meets the guy who is just so cruel and so abusive and so toxic for him, and they do the line,
I think about you too much.
I don't think about you.
If you've watched enough TV and movies, you have seen that line in so many other things. Hell, I've probably seen that line in fucking professional wrestling a bunch of times at this point. And a line like that, it's like a placeholder line. You know, like, the emotional exchange you want those characters to have, but you haven't finessed the dialogue enough for it to feel like sharp or meaningful or distinct to those characters. And so it just feels like this placeholder piece of script that was left in the episode, and it was because they never had a chance to refine it. They never had a chance to like come up with something more evolved or better or more specific to who these people are, because these episodes were rushed, and they absolutely felt like that, and it was just fucking devastating. And that's a huge part of why it took me so long to watch season 5, because I just had no faith in the Bear to rally. I had no faith in its ability to come back, and whether it does or not, it's kind of tough, okay? I think one of the things that's like most evident about season 5 is there is this total switch in format. Now, as opposed to taking place over like, you know, a period of time, be it a couple of days or weeks or months or whatever, The entirety of season 5 takes place over one evening, and particularly it's this evening where they think a critic for the restaurant is going to be there and they need to be performing at their best, and there's also a rainstorm and they're overbooked, and there's all these different things mounted up against the characters. It's kind of just like this big, like, nightmarishly awful shift that they all have to work their way through. But what's interesting about that is another TV show that I've recently been watching is The Pit. And The Pit is very similar to The Bear in that it is this very nuanced and critical look of a particular industry. But The Pit is focused on emergency room workers, doctors, nurses, different staff who work in hospitals, and how they all handle this absolutely nightmarish day of working a day shift in the emergency room of a hospital. And The Pit has this particular gimmick where every episode covers precisely 1 hour working in this place. So the first episode takes place from 7 a.m. to 8 a.m., second episode is 8 a.m. to 9 a.m., and so on. And in doing that, it really captures this really, like, intense feeling, because every second now matters. Every second is pretty much taking place in real time, and you can see The Bear going for something similar in this season, but whether it works or not is a different thing. Now, there are good points to it. So one of my biggest criticisms about the last 2 seasons is it became fairly obvious that they could no longer get all the actors in one location for very long. And so they had to, like, have all those bottle episodes, and all of a sudden those character dynamics that were so important to the show, they're just kind of not there. Well, the good news about season 5 is that is kind of back, because now you literally have all the actors crammed on set for basically one entire shoot. Like, that's how this feels. It nearly has that feeling of being constructed for, like, one long, like, cinema experience, like a film that was then chopped up into smaller pieces. So the really intense exchanges between the characters, you do have that back, and it is back to, like, a lot about food and a lot about, like, the trials and tribulations of running a restaurant and all this kind of stuff. So, like, you do have a certain element of, like, what made The Bear great in season 1 and 2 back, and that's good. But I think you carry a lot of the weaknesses of season 3 and 4 as well. And particularly, I feel like that sentimentality. I think what it feels like is that the writers are now so in love with these characters that the characters are these really flanderized versions of themselves a lot of the time. And particularly, like, you get characters like Fak, who, like, in the first season was kind of this, like, foul-mouthed but kind of lovable sort of janitorial electrician figure. And in season 5, he's basically a giant baby who everyone has to be gentle to. And you see that, like, in a lot of the different characters, and it's just kind of irritating. I don't know how to put it, but it's like, it feels like all, like, the harsh edges of the characters were sanded down, and we're left with this kind of, like, gelatinous cast of people who, they can be a bit grumpy, but, like, they're there. And I'd also say that, like, some of the writing just feels very, like, I want to say amateurish, but I think what I really mean is it has that same sense of just, like, not being refined. There's this one season towards the end where one of the characters is like, "No, I didn't say anything about you, bitch." And then he's like, "Oh, did you say something?" And it's like this entire protracted sequence where the characters are doing, like, the cough talking thing. And it's just like, I don't know, how many TV shows have you seen that shit in over the years? Because to me, it's a lot. And it's like, it makes so much of the dialogue of The Bear feel like pasted together from scripts of the other show. And I really feel like, again, you get that kind of writing when there isn't enough time to refine it, and it's a real shame. I would also say that this season really kind of front loads a lot of its drama in that, like, there's a lightning storm, they're dramatically overbooked, they're going through all these different problems, and eventually, like, their ceiling collapses, and it really seems like they're not even going to be able to open the restaurant. And then it kind of hits a point where, like, everything just starts to go right. And I feel like before long, it starts to feel like there's a kind of magical effect happening, and that all the problems are getting solved without very satisfying solutions. Like, you get a lot of episodes where, characters are talking about the problems, and then those problems get resolved very quickly. And I don't think the show does a great job of, like, taking you through how they do it in a way that doesn't feel like, again, like, just kind of magical, And it's really sucks a lot of the tension out, because what I would love to see is like more problems actually causing like genuine ramifications that the characters kind of can't get over. But that's not what happens. Like every time something comes up, a character turns out like this miracle solution. Oh, you know, this beef left in the fridge and we can actually use that for this, and that's gonna let us, you know, get over this problem with the entrees or whatever. And it's just like, okay, yeah. And it all kind of culminates in one of like the most like happy endings for any cast of characters I've ever seen. I'm not going to go into spoilers, but suffice to say, everything just kind of works out to a sort of ludicrous degree. And it's like, it really ends The Bear on, I feel like, a very, very limp note. And even like there's certain like plot elements, like one of it is the pastry chef Marcus. His dad is coming to the restaurant that night, and it's a huge deal that Marcus make like the best thing he can make. And it's like, it's kind of interesting, but then the resolution is his dad just going like, "Hey, that was good food," and that's it, you know. And so The Bear kind of ends, and I'm like, okay. I think season 5, for me personally, I don't think it's anywhere near as bad as season 3 and 4. But it's still a long way from season 1 and 2. And like, I kind of want to put off making this video a little bit because I hate that. I hate that for just be like, yeah, you know, still wasn't that good. And that's a disappointment. But there is a little bit of a silver lining here that I wanted to get to. And that is, between season 4 and 5, The Bear actually put out this one-off episode called Gary. And Gary specifically is a flashback episode in which Mikey, the brother of Carmi, the main character, the guy who's dead before the start of The Bear, it's about him and Richie being the service worker, the kind of waiter of the restaurant, going on a road trip back in the day for this kind of like, you don't really know, they're delivering a package, you don't really know the deal, you never super find out, but it seems kind of sketchy. And it's literally about those two characters spending an hour together and taking this road trip. They go to this small town of Gary in Indiana, and it's like this real kind of like sort of very middle America, quite empty town. And it's like those two existing in this place. You know, they go and they play a big game of basketball with the local youth. They go and, you know, they eat at a hot dog place they really like, and then they go and drink in a bar. And I really actually kind of loved this episode. This episode to me felt like old Bear. It felt like the time when The Bear really had something to say about like trauma and knowing difficult people. And it's heartbreaking because you're watching these two dudes, and this episode really felt like it felt like one of those times. Like, I remember there was a time not that long ago when I went to a Kumacon in Galway. Shout out to a Kumacon, it's a really good con. And me and my friend Brian went there, and we kind of just had this day in Galway where we sort of had nothing to do, so we made our own entertainment, and we like went to arcades and like we ate at like, you know, a really good Mexican place, and it was just like such a good day. And it reminded me of that. It's like you and your bro, your best friend, that just like kind of hanging out in one of these places and just enjoying each other's company. But it gets to a point where Mikey, who is this like kind of semi-mysterious brother figure, because again, he died before The Bear ever starts, you start to really see what's going on in that dude's head and the effect his mom had on him, and you really start to see how this dude is so lovable, but also so fucking difficult to be around. And then the specific way that culminates, and the specific way that like he hurts Richie, and like it all kind of explodes in this really awful scene that felt so sincere. If you have ever known a person who's kind of struggling, but a person who kind of takes those struggles out on the people around them. And it's genuinely like a great season of television. I really, really loved it. And it really is like this absolutely awesome episode of television that really reminded me of why I love The Bear in the first place. Because after seasons 3 to 5, honestly, I was kind of struggling a little bit. I was like, man, was this show ever that good? And this episode really showed me that, like, no, there was absolutely something to The Bear, and I'm still going to hold those early seasons in fondness because this episode brought me right back there. So yeah, that's what I have to say about the final season of The Bear. It was okay, but that in-between episode of Gary, Indiana, it kind of made it all, it made me remember why I love this show.